The Wild West era has been idealized more than most times in American history. It all began with the initial European settlements in North America in the early 17th century. However, the classic period of the Old West, featuring cowboys, gunslingers, prospectors, and outlaws, lasted from the 1850s to the early 1900s. Stories in dime novels and Western films crafted a frontier legend where tough men ventured out to conquer a desolate land and battle villains. This image has become a beloved and enduring part of American culture, even with its many historical inaccuracies. As proof of the enduring influence of this myth, numerous notions and iconic Old West visuals persist today, even if they are not historically accurate. Here we dispel 7 of the most prevalent misconceptions. Myth number 1. Wild West cowboys wore cowboy hats. Nothing says cowboy more than a classic cowboy hat, but the Stetson didn't come onto the market until 1865, and the original hat didn't look like the iconic Stetsons we know today. A more common choice among Old West cowboys was the derby hat, also known as the bowler hat, partly because it didn't blow off easily in strong winds or while riding a horse. Many famous cowboys and outlaws, including Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Black Bart, and Billy the Kid, wore bowler hats. Myth number 2. Quick-draw gun duels were common. Quick-draw gun duels are a staple of Western dime novels and movies, typically with 2 steely-eyed gunfighters facing off in a dusty street while nervous locals watch from behind saloon doors and dirty windows. These kinds of duels, however, almost never happened. Typical shootouts were normally chaotic and impulsive events, often involving more than 2 men and with bullets flying in all directions, not the slow and calculated high-noon face-offs depicted in popular culture. One of the very few examples of a one-on-one quick-draw duel in a public place is the famous encounter between Wild Bill Hickok and the gambler Davis Tutt. Hickok killed Tutt, becoming a folk hero in the process. Myth number 3. Banks were easy pickings. If Westerns are to be believed, robbing banks was a common pastime for any self-respecting outlaw. The criminals would ride into town in broad daylight, hold up a bank, ride off with their saddlebags full of money, and disappear into the wilderness. But this is very much a Hollywood creation. According to historian Larry Schweikart, there were fewer than 10 confirmed bank robberies between 1859 and 1900 across 15 frontier states. Other sources suggest the number was higher than 10, but still fewer than you would suspect. As Schweikart wrote, there are more bank robberies in modern-day Dayton, Ohio in a year than there were in the entire Old West in a decade, perhaps in the entire frontier period. Myth number 4. Cowboys frequently fought with Indians. The popular cowboys and Indians narrative has both parties constantly at each other's throats, but cowboys rarely fought with indigenous peoples, and certainly not to the extent shown in Western movies. Tension did exist between ranchers and Native Americans, but cowboys normally avoided potentially hostile encounters. Native Americans, meanwhile, didn't ambush pioneer wagon trains nearly as much as we are led to believe. They mainly tolerated wagon trains and were more likely to trade than attack. Between 1840 and 1860, Native Americans killed 362 emigrants, making them far less dangerous than many other threats in the Wild West, including river crossings, hunting accidents, and falling off your own horse. Myth number 5. All cowboys were white. John Wayne, Gary Cooper, James Stewart, Clint Eastwood. Think of nearly any actor known for starring in classic westerns, and they have one thing in common. They're all white. The popular narrative, however, doesn't tell the full story. Historians estimate that as many as 1 in 4 American cowboys were black, as many formerly enslaved African Americans found work on the ranches out west in the wake of the Civil War. What's more, the cowboy culture didn't even originate in the United States. It came from a style of ranching introduced by Spanish colonists in the 16th century and adopted originally in Mexico, where cattle ranchers and herders were known as vaqueros. By the late 19th century, as many as 1 in 3 cowboys were Mexican. Myth number 6. The typical frontiersman was a romantic figure. Cowboys and Wild West lawmen are often portrayed as romantic types, either the silent type or the gallant hero who rides to the rescue, looking quite dapper in his clean shirt and shiny boots. But these frontiersmen were nowhere near as neat and tidy as we see on our screens, and, to put it bluntly, They stank. Author and historian Harry Chrisman wrote that cowboys smelled of cow and horse dung and seldom bathed. They wore beards that easily became nests for lice, fleas, or other vermin, and provided secure foci of infection for barber's itch. Myth number 7, everyone was packing a six-shooter. In the movies, it seems like every cowboy, cowhand, and dubious wandering stranger carries a revolver or a rifle. In reality, guns were heavily regulated in many towns and cities on the frontier. Most people did own guns in the West, but when it came to entering a town, you either had to leave your weapon at home or hand it over to local authorities. Dodge City, a famously wild frontier town in Kansas, had a large sign in the middle of town reading, "The carrying of firearms strictly prohibited." Indeed, the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, the most famous shootout in the history of the Old West, reached a head when lawman Wyatt Earp ordered a group of cowboys to drop their weapons in accordance with local laws. According to Adam Winkler, a specialist in United States constitutional law, Tombstone had much more restrictive laws on carrying guns in public in the 1880s than it has today.